The first tour that I go out on with Machine Head is Napalm Death and Obituary death metal tour.
Sick
And
tour.
I'm singing a little bit here and there, and we're not going over great on every night because they're like, singing, that's for pussies. What the fuck? Like,
Everyone, this is Joe from Loudwire, and joining me today on another episode of How I Learned to Scream, it's the General, Machine Head's Robb Flynn. New Machine Head coming out of Kingdom and Crown. Very excited for the release of that. Rob, how you doing?
good, Joe. How are you, man?
Doing pretty good. Better now that I'm talking to you. What was the first time you ever heard an extreme metal vocal? Growing up in that kind of thrash scene, you could loosely define what an extreme vocal could be to you.
I mean, for me, I think that, when I first heard Unleash in the East by Judas Priest, that was like the highest vocals I'd ever heard. I was just like, oh, wow, like, what is this? So I remember just laying on my back in my bedroom, just screaming along to those songs. I just was obsessed with that album. Singing along to that was pivotal in what I was growing up with.
Your career kind of predates the emergence of death metal and black metal. So do you remember when those scenes were bubbling up, what your reaction was when you heard some of those like deeper growls or those high shrieks and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, I was pretty lucky to be growing up in the Bay Area thrash scene as a teenager. I mean, the first time I ever saw Metallica, they were supporting Raven at a 500 capacity club called the Keystone Berkeley, and there was maybe 250 people there. And we met James Hetfield that night, got an autograph, and just headbanging the whole night. It was awesome. There was this thriving club scene, so there was punk rock bands, and there was hardcore bands, and then there was thrash bands that were coming up. And even like early death metal, like I give Possessed credit. They came up with that song death metal off the last song on their first album. We were crazy about Possessed. That was pretty brutal vocals. There was no, I think up until that point, even Slayer had like melody when they were singing. So we were hearing that. We were starting to hear stuff from like Germany, like Sodom, certainly Creator, Destruction, those kind of like, there was no note. It was just brutal. And we loved it. And then Morbid Tales, I guess, came around, and when Morbid Tales and Hellhammer came around, that's when we were like, oh shit. So many things from Machine Head, like every time I go ow or ooh, all those are straight out of the Morbid Tales like playbook right there. DRI was a huge influence on me. Like the second thrash show that I ever went to, it wasn't even thrash, it was punk show that I went to, was DRI on the Violent Pacification EP record release, when all they drew was crazy San Francisco skinheads, and it was basically a 45-minute long fight. That was extreme in a different way. Like it was very shrieky and, very high and a million words, per minute.
Yeah.
And, so that was a huge, huge influence. I loved that.
Mhm.
I loved that era of DRI.
Now, early in your career, how supportive was your family of what you were doing?
It's funny. My dad never came and saw us until 1999. So that was, well into Machine Head's career, like 7 years into our career. We were on a third record when he finally came and saw us for the first time. My mom went and saw me play with Violence when we opened for GBH and The Accused, which was just, it's one of those spitting punk rock shows that was just fucking crazy. And she was like, I don't know what you're doing. Like, this is in Violence, mind you. She didn't go to a Machine Head show until 2010. So,
Wow.
yeah, so like 20 years later almost.
So you moved over to Violence.
Yep.
And then you started Machine Head, and that was the first time you were actually a front man. When did you start toying with the idea of being also a vocalist in a band and not just a guitarist?
The first band I was ever in, I was the vocalist. At some point, we got in a guitar player that was way better than me. Like, I was still very just rudimentary in my playing. I just became the singer for a while. So the first actual couple shows that I did was just as a singer. And because I think I was pretty awkward. Like I didn't have a guitar, and I had basically been playing guitar for years, and now here I am just singing for the first time after like a month, and I wasn't a very good like standalone front man. Like I needed my guitarmer to like hide behind. And but I had sang like I had always sang, like I had sang at talent shows like in school, and I always wanted to be on stage.
So you had a little bit of the vocal primer, toying around with it before you started Machine Head, and then you have to develop a certain vocal style. How did you decide to go in that direction? And what was it like as you were trying to transition to more aggressive, harsher elements with your voice?
I didn't know what I was doing at first. Like I just totally self-taught. Like I don't have any training, and so I just start belting it out like Lemmy. You know what I mean? Or like Hetfield, like trying to get that. But then, I remember hearing like Morbid Angel. I remember hearing the first Fear Factory record and going, oh, I can do probably something more brutal like that. Machine Head just kept on tuning down and tuning down and tuning down. And pretty soon I was just like, oh, okay, like 5 steps down is like my sweet spot. Then I started bringing in like that early death metal, David Vincent from Morbid Angel. Rise, make your crown is falling. I was listening to a lot of Alice in Chains, and I knew I always wanted to have like harmonies, but I also was listening to tons of hardcore. So there was like I wanted like not backing vocals, but I wanted like calls and answers. So like one guy sang one thing and then another guy sang another thing. So, it could, Max Cavalera for sure. Like once I heard like, Chaos AD and Arise, like I loved those records, and I was like, oh, okay. Like he's still kind of singing a note, but it's just one note, but it sounds fucking heavy as fuck.
How about going on tour and maintaining your voice? Because what I hear a lot is that artists will go on tour for the first time, play a couple shows, go way too hard, and then kind of adjust and figure out a more comfortable way to do the vocals without kind of maybe projecting, expelling so much air, putting as much emphasis into it while still getting that tone across.
Totally. And the first tour that I go out on with Machine Head is Napalm Death and Obituary death metal tour.
Sick tour.
I'm singing a little bit here and there, and we're not going over great on every night because they're like, singing, that's for pussies, what the fuck. At that point I didn't really care. I was just like, hey, well, if I lose my singing voice, who cares, because this crowd's not going to care. But what ended up happening is that I lost my heavy voice, and alls I had was my singing voice. I ended up calling Billy from Biohazard. We were friends with the Biohazard guys. He had taken a couple he'd learned some vocal warm-ups from this guy Don Lawrence, and so he mails me a cassette of his vocal warm-up, and from that point on I pretty much have done that vocal warm-up for most of my life, and it saved me. It like saved my throat. I do a really long warm-up. Like I warm up twice, 2 20-minute warm-ups, and then I do a heavy warm-up, and then throughout the show, like I want to say an hour into the show, my voice opens up even more. That's a lot of singing. Like that's like 2 hours of singing I've done at that point. And then it opens up to another thing. So that's the part that I'm always looking forward to. And one of the things that, especially when you're on tour, you want to kind of overdo everything, right? Like you're just trying to make the most intense performance ever. And so when you say a word like power, you're going, this massive put on it. And that every time you do that, it blows out your throat. And, any teacher will be like, hey, look, no one's hearing the puh. All they're hearing is the hour. And so you start to learn those little things like your k, your p, your t. You can soften those up and then just make your voice last longer. And then, of course, when you're on the road, you're around a million people and you're talking and talking and talking and laughing and laughing and laughing. Like you do more damage fucking playing poker with your bandmates than you do singing a lot of the time. That's the shit that is the wear and tear on your throat.
Last question here. It's something we always talk about on How I Learned to Scream. Might not apply to you as much since you got the guitar. What was it? The Guitarmer, I think you called it. in front of you, you don't really have the ability to cup the microphone.
No, I do
A
not.
very controversial topic. I'm sure you've toured with bands who have done it before. What do you think of the technique?
I mean, I think if that's what you like, just fucking yeah, go for it. You know, I mean, I get why they do it. It sounds killer. Like it just
You
makes it
sound like a
sound,
swamp
it
monster.
sounds so much more brutal. Yeah, I mean, some people think that it's cheating. I know a lot of death metal guys think that it's cheating, and in some ways it kind of is. But it can sound good. You know, Chino Marino cups the mic like crazy. You know, that's kind of how he gets a lot of his sound. So, but it works for him. But I know a guy like George doesn't cup the mic, and it's fucking brutal. When you've got a true brutal voice like that, you don't need to cup the mic. Again, I don't have the ability to do it, so I have to push my throat to full distortion in order to make that sound. So I get it, you know, but I'm not like a hater on it. Like if I see dudes doing it, I'm like, whatever, you know.
Well, Rob, thanks so much for joining us here today. Of course, the new Machine Head album of Kingdom and Crown. Gotta go pick it up. Killer Machine Head record. Always a killer Machine Head record. Rob, so great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, good talking to you, Joe.
Faithless of the night mask, all of the light poison everything. False conspiracy, soulless enemy, dead for mother say. Look around now.